Hello, and this is going to be Unit 2, Part 3, last part for Oceanography Unit 2. And we're going to talk about formation of life. This is a never-ending question in terms of problems with politics, as well as maybe even just in your family. But I'd like you to all keep an open mind in terms of this unit, because this unit talks about some things that may actually be um, true or not true in your beliefs. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about in terms of life is that it is self-replicating. This picture right here is actually where we take one double-stranded DNA, we take a protein, and we actually unzip it, or we actually straighten it out. Then we take a protein and we unzip it, and we take the yellow A's, T's, C's, and G's, and then we actually take proteins and we actually put them on the strands and make a second strand. There's the original strand, so we have an original there, and we also have an original here, but we put a new strand on each one of these, making two brand new strands, so the cell can replicate itself and each cell have its own DNA. So it is self-replicating. It's a totally cool process, which if you had me for biology, I showed you an animation of it, and it goes in high speed. Other thing is that we have to make cells separate from the environment. If you take a look at this picture, we have extracellular space. This is the stuff outside the cell. This is the cytoplasm, the stuff inside the cell. Both of these are 90+% water, but it's also how we move things in and out of the cell. And if you look at the cell membrane itself, it's got a phospholipid bilayer. It's got a section, the lipid part, which is actually hydrophobic, stays inside, and then we have the phosphate group, which is on the top, which is hydrophilic, which means it loves water, so it actually sets itself up so it's touching water. We have proteins inside of it. We have cholesterol inside to keep it moving, and it is a very dynamic phase. We have flags on the outside to identify it as itself, or to talk about other proteins that are coming around. Then we must be able to respond to the environment, predator-prey responses, growth and development, but we have to change with the environment. And on this planet, we are all carbon-based, and we all contain liquid water. It's sort of an ocean, salinity-wise, right inside our body. Oxygen is essential also. If you take a look at our atmosphere, we have basically 5 layers, and the layers actually are temperature dependent. So as it cools down, when it stops cooling down, we call that the tropopause, and then it starts warming up, and when it stops warming up, we call that the stratopause. Then it cools down and to the mesopause, from the mesosphere, and then it goes to the thermosphere, and then finally to the exosphere. This is the ozone layer, which we're going to talk about in terms of oxygen, and this is the weather sphere where we actually live. It shows you Mount Everest is right there, so it's right at the top of the troposphere. There are places on the planet that have a problem with ozone. Ozone is when we take oxygen atoms like O2 and we put another oxygen into it, we make O3, which is the ozone, and that goes through and nitrogen dioxide and visible light, which breaks it back down into oxygen. And this is what we don't like, because we need this ozone for protecting us from UV radiation. So oxygen is important in terms of animals because it helps us oxidize food. This is the equation for cellular respiration. We take the sugar that the plants made, we take the oxygen the plants made, and we take water, and we take that in these ratios. We run it through 16 enzymatic reactions, things to lower the activation energy so it actually moves. And what we produce is 6 CO2s and 12 waters, which can go back into cellular respiration. So if you just flip this arrow, put sunlight into it, we actually make water, oxygen, and sugar. But this is the cellular respiration that all life on our planet has to do. And it produces ATP, which is the energy for life. We also need oxygen for decomposition. When we break down organic material, it's an oxidizing process. Theoretically, before there was oxygen or some other energy molecule out there, there was no decomposition. Ozone, O3, in the stratosphere takes ultraviolet radiation and actually stops it. And ultraviolet radiation is dangerous to most living organisms. There are some extremophiles that don't seem to care, but things like you and everybody you've known and everybody who lives around you and everybody you eat and you play with and all that, UV light is dangerous. Oceans readily absorb ultraviolet radiation. This is one idea why we think that life probably developed in an ocean, as well as some other indications in terms of blood being salinity, in terms of the fossil record, showing us that life in the ocean is a lot older than life on the ground. First organic substances. Early atmosphere had hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen. These make up most of the organic molecules that make up life. Dr. Stanley, 1953, had an experiment where he actually took a simulated ocean and he pumped in gases, which represented the old time atmosphere, the primordial atmosphere, ran it through a cell here that had electrodes, which actually acted like lightning, and then had water cooling. And as the water came down into this trap, we started to notice within a few days, even a couple of weeks, that organic molecules, so we put these in there, and we added electricity, and we got amino acids and nucleotides. These make up proteins. These make up the DNA and RNA. And here is an amino acid structure, one of 20 that you need to eat to get all the proteins you need. And this is deoxyribo, or ribo sugar. So this is the deoxyribonucleic acid, and it could also be the ribonucleic acid with a couple of changes. First organic molecules, 3 ideas on how life may have begun. Probably in the ocean, and probably with the help of lightning, like it showed in Stanley's equation. Could happen in hot underwater vents, and incredibly cold water, incredibly deep temperature, and no light, where we get this black mineral-rich water coming out that's percolated through and dissolved material way down in the mantle. It actually comes out. These metals precipitate out, and there's bacteria that live down here, this orangey stuff, and the stuff probably in the water that can actually use that instead of ATP. Or instead of oxygen, to actually do the process of chemosynthesis, not cytosis, which is a disease. And actually takes this material and produces ATP so that the critters can actually use it. And then there are lots of other critters that eat the bacteria, and there are critters that eat the things that eat bacteria, and it starts its own little food web. This is out of Yellowstone National Park, in this beautiful rainbowy color. We've got the water, which is a thermal vent. You can see people can walk right around it. And then these other colors, these are bacteria, which is beautiful, and they're temperature dependent. So this greenish yellowish stuff has to have hotter water than the orange and hotter than the light tan. And you can see materials actually coming from other hot springs into here, or it's flowing out, but it's got the cooler browns and tans because the water is cooler, but it's bacterial life. Or maybe it came from outer space. Could have come in an asteroid. Could have come from an extraterrestrial being. We don't know. We just know that at some point in time life started, and we are remnants of that. First organisms, there was no plant life, there was no producer, so the first life had to be a heterotroph, had to get its energy from outside. It couldn't produce its own energy, had to get it from inside means. So they probably were eating external food supply, probably fermenting bacteria. Then autotrophs came in, autotrophs like anaerobic bacteria, things that do not like oxygen, and oxygen is a poison. And they had a process called chemosynthesis, which again uses chemistry to synthesize energy, so we can actually do what we need to do, or they need to do what they didn't need to do. Photosynthetic organisms, photosynthesis needs sunlight. Earliest may have actually used hydrogen sulfur, which is a rotten egg smell. Earliest cyanobacteria in the fossil record 3 billion years ago. Oxygen was released, and it polluted the early atmosphere. These are anaerobic bacteria which didn't like oxygen, but it started producing oxygen, and that actually makes the critters more energetic. It's a lot easier to use oxygen than it is to use this material or any of the other chemosynthetic materials. Oxygen is a much more energetic molecule, so it actually made much more energetic creatures. And the atmosphere no longer was dominated with carbon dioxide, so it probably cooled off a little bit, although water is a pretty good greenhouse gas. Multicellular life, we started off with prokaryotic cells first. These were the earliest. They were single-celled. They had no nucleus, and they also had no internal membrane. If you take a look at their DNA, the DNA was a loop. They had ribosomes. Ribosomes actually are needed for producing proteins. They're made out of proteins just like you are, but they're single-celled critters, relatively primitive. Then we moved to eukaryotic cell, which is true nucleus. These are the earliest. They actually appeared about 1.4 to 1.6 billion years ago. They are multi-celled at times, although they can be single-celled, but these are the first ones that became multi-celled. They do have their own nucleus. It's wrapped in a nuclear membrane. They have complex membranes wrapping most of the material that's inside of it. Endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth. Mitochondria, which is like a bacterial cell actually inside of the cell, which is very good at producing ATP, although we can produce ATP in the cytoplasm also. We have microskeletons for support. We have all kinds of things in the cell, which most of them are wrapped with a membrane, which makes them much easier to become more complex. Evolution, organisms change through time. They respond to their environment. They have to change with their environment. And there are major changes in life forms, and we do have extinction events if it doesn't work out. So you can see some things don't make it through. Some things make it through and change. Cenozoic, we don't have, this looks like it's all reptilian. It doesn't have anything in terms of mammals, but the mammals probably started forming down here. And as we had a mass extinction 65 million years ago, the end of the Mesozoic, Cenozoic explosion took off, and mammals were now the dominant life form. Radioactive dating. How do we know things are actually as old as they are? This is a mammoth they discovered in ice, and it's actually in Russia, and they've got it in an ice cave to protect it. But radioactive elements change spontaneously, which means they go from the parent, which is the radioactive form, non-happy form, to a daughter cell, which is more happy, at a certain rate. The rate is fixed. The ratio between the original material, the parent, the blue line, and the product, which is the daughter isotope, the red line, is proportional to their age, and half-life is the time it takes to change 1/2 of the sample of the product. So if you look at this parent, as the parent goes down, the daughter goes up, and when we get to 1 half-life, whatever this is, if it's a second, a minute, a million years, a billion years, whatever it is, and different isotopes actually have different half-lives. Here's one for carbon-14, which has a half-life of 5,000. It's 5,713 years, I think, and I probably should have put that on here, but I don't see it anywhere. But basically, cosmic radiation takes a neutron, it knocks it into nitrogen, and knocks out a protein, which changes it into carbon, and the carbon-14 makes up a very small percentage. And what happens is the animals take it in, or the plants take it in terms of carbon dioxide, and they'll take it in as long as they survive. And as soon as they die, what happens is the carbon-14 loses the proton. It changes into a beta particle and becomes nitrogen-14 again, which goes back up into the air to start the process all over again. But as long as it's alive, it pulls it in. As soon as it dies, the carbon-14 starts changing back to nitrogen, and at a half-life of 5,700, and like I said, I think 13 years, about half of it is gone. And that's not true for every tree and every horse and every dinosaur, but it is true if you look at all the material and you average them, we do get a nice half-life. And then that same amount of time to get 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, and then it just keeps going down. In the case of nitrogen-14, which goes up, Excuse me, a lot of time what we do is we actually look at the daughter isotope, which is a lot easier to see later on in time. But if it bubbles up, we can't. So we actually do have a limit to like 5 or 6 half-lives for carbon-14 before we can't really see it anymore. Geologic time, we have time periods, we have ages and boundaries, we have major extinction events or episodes, and we have oldest rock found about 4 billion years. So we don't really have a record for anything in this area. This is that molten Earth. And then we start moving into a more civilized Earth, and then we start getting life abounding in what's called the Proterozoic. So we have the Paleoproterozoic, we have the Mesoproterozoic, and then Neoproterozoic, which is early, middle, and new Proterozoic, which ended about 540 years ago. And we started the Paleozoic, age of the fishes, and then we actually started the Mesozoic, and now we're in the Cenozoic, and they actually expanded it on this side, very much like that web assignment we did with that shockwave file. And then we talk about way up here, this top of this kind of gray line is where the humans come in. So you've all heard of Cretaceous and Jurassic and Triassic. You may have heard of Permian and Pennsylvanian, Mississippian, Devonian. You may even heard of Cambrian. The Precambrian period is actually right here. And what they're basically saying is it came before the Cambrian, and this is where life really started to take off. And that is the end of Unit 2, where we talked about the origins, beginning of the universe, Earth, and life. Okay, that's it. Thank you.